All right, we are here. I am Ty, and we are here with our founder, Denise, with the Career Success Academy podcast. And today is special because we are on the video camera together.
We are.
We are here together. And it's exciting also because we are finishing up season one of the Career Success Academy podcast. I know that everybody has been enjoying these podcasts. Listen, I've been behind the scenes editing. And if I'm enjoying these podcasts, I know everybody that's here is enjoying the podcast as well. And so thank you for tuning in today. And as you are enjoying the podcast, we encourage you to continue to share, to like, and subscribe to all of the platforms that you're consuming all of this content. Today, we just wanted to do something a little bit different. I wanted to interview Denise and find out just some background, some things about your podcast, how you got started, stories about your podcast. I love hearing the podcast, but sometimes what's even better than hearing the podcast is hearing the stories behind the podcast. And so as we get ready to jump in today, one of the things that I want to ask you about is what is the genesis of you starting up these podcasts? How did you get started? What inspired you, even with this particular season of podcasts that we're in right now?
So, first of all, hello, everyone. As
Hello.
Ty said, we normally are voices behind the scenes, right? And this time we decided to do a video. And so I just want to say hello. It's so good to be back on video again. Speaking of Genesis, career success for women leaders is my third podcast. And my first couple of podcasts were on video. And so it's just great to be back on the screen. In terms of what started me on my podcast journey, it really was about this nudge that I felt to lift voices. That was my moniker for a very long time, is I wanted to lift voices. I felt that there were stories that needed to be told. There were amazing experiences that people had. And I believe that we overcome by the power of our testimony, right? So if we can lift voices and get testimonies told and testimonies heard, then there's a bigger chance that someone would be encouraged, that someone would feel more empowered in their situation, that they'll feel like they can accomplish that hard thing that may be before them simply because they heard someone else's story, to be able to really overcome. So that's kind of what started me in the podcast space. Um, I believe there's three things that come when you start to take action. The first is you build your confidence. The second is you get clarity. You get real clear as you're doing things. And the third is God sends you help. And in my podcast journey, that truly has been the case. I have gotten way more confident. I remember the very first time I sat down at the mic, I was so nervous. I really didn't know what I was doing, but I was determined, right? And so I did it, and I have been at the mic for years now. It's so crazy to say that, but I've been at the mic for years now. And then I started to get clarity, right? As I'm doing it, as I'm having conversations, I started to get real clear about what I wanted to talk about what resonated with me, what was resonating with listeners and followers of me. And so I continued to just niche down to the point of talking about career success. And then God sent help. God sent Ty. God sent help. And that has just been a game changer to moving the needle forward. And so the genesis was about lifting voices, but the journey has been so incredible and so impactful, not just for me, but for so many people around the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, that resonates with me. Honestly, I was one of those people who I think I knew that I was an influencer. By that I mean that I knew that my words have impact. Um, and my wife actually had to challenge me about that Because I'm like, I don't want to be on social media. I don't want to be out there. I don't want everybody to be in my business. I don't want everybody to know my personal situations. But when you realize that you have something in you that other people need, it's almost like I got to force myself to do this. I
Mhm.
have to force myself to be in front of the camera. I got to force myself to be on the microphone. But it is rewarding to be able to hear the stories of how people are impacted by that as well.
Mhm.
Let me ask you this. As someone leading the charge, right? As an influencer of influencers, as an encourager of encouragers, how do you stay motivated? How do you continue producing regular content over and over and over and over? And people come looking for this stuff. They're like, hey, Denise, you better put out another episode. I need to hear this. This is really good. I need this to grow. How do you keep yourself full to continue to produce regular, high level content, not just throwing out anything? What you are putting out, I believe, is changing lives altogether.
Mhm.
How do you continue to do that?
It's interesting that you say high level because I listen to it. I do the QA for it. I can send it
Mhm.
back and be like, Ty, this one little phrase that needs to come out. So I'm very intentional about it, right? And so for me, I try to just show up in a way that is something I listen to. After every episode
Mhm.
publishes, I listen to it like I'm just a regular listener. And so I consume what's being put out to edify myself. The key way, there's a couple of things packed into that question, but the key way is to keep your own cup full, right?
Mhm.
Um, you get depleted when your cup is empty and you're continuing to flow out. So you have to be very intentional about the regimen you have for yourself. How do you feed yourself so that everything that draws off of you comes from the overflow of what you're doing to take care of yourself? You said a very interesting phrase, right? And it's something that, I'll be honest, I've reckoned with more in recent day, which is being an influencer of influencers, being a coach of coaches, being the person who can hold space for powerful people.
Mhm.
I know that that's something that God has gifted me with. It takes a certain degree of wisdom, integrity, and credibility to hold space for powerful people. Powerful people typically do not open up their vulnerable sides to people who can't handle their strength.
Mhm.
Right. And if you can't handle their strength, you are going to really be misunderstanding when you see their weakness. And God has gifted me with the ability to hold space for strong people, to hold space for
Mhm.
powerful people. I often find that I am the one that's coupled as a destiny partner for someone where they're trying to accomplish this thing, this mandate that's on their life, and God brings me closer to help facilitate that through. And I think part of that is because I have been willing to surrender myself for my own growth, and I understand what it takes to evolve and grow. And I understand all the facets of who I am. I'm beautiful, but I'm beautifully complicated, right? There's a lot of things that go into who I am. And so I'm self aware that way. And I'm okay allowing other people to have that too. And so being on the forefront of that requires that you're not full of yourself, but that you're full of grace and that you're full of mercy and you're willing to dispense that out to people who need it at the highest levels. And so I will tell you, there's times that I can be very hard on myself. I can be very hard on what I bring to the table, but I do believe in delivering something of quality at a
Mhm.
certain standard. You remember when you and I first started to engage, I was like, okay, now how would you think through this? What would you pull out of this? Like, I really wanted to know that you could see it at the level that I wanted to operate at. And so I'm so glad that God brought you close to help me in this space. And that's just because I honor this, right? I know that it's something that is a blessed space. I know that God is very intentional about what he wants to have happen through this work. And so I'm just very honoring and intentional and deliberate about how I show up. But that all comes from a regimen of how I take care of myself.
Listen, we could go ahead and finish. You man, you said a lot. You said a mouthful. For anybody who's listening to this, pause and go back maybe like 2-3 minutes to the beginning when she started talking and listen to that whole part again. You dropped a bunch of gems just right there. I'll say this. I feel honored that you trust me with this baby. Because I know this podcast, this vision, this is your own personal business baby. And I know that people don't just trust anybody with their vision. Because you have to trust that I see what you see. And so I remember that day when you were just like, so if I gave you this, what can you pull out in this? And in my mind, I'm thinking like she's testing me. I already know. I already know, but I get it though, because in the same way, I think I'm the same with visions and dreams that I have. You just can't share it with anybody. You just can't give it to anybody because everybody doesn't care for it the same way that you would.
Mm-hmm.
So to be able to find people that can take what means a lot to you and then they take care of it with the same compassion, with the same drive, with the same energy as you would. I don't want to say it's rare, but it does take work to find.
So
And
I'll
so
tell you what stuck out to me was like after you consume some of the content, you sent me a message and you're like, this is good.
yeah,
You were like, this is really good. And so that meant a lot to me, because the seat you sit in, you get a chance to come across a whole lot of stuff, right? And
absolutely.
you're consuming a lot and you're like, okay, something's missing here. It's almost like having a piece of meat with no seasoning on it,
Yep.
right? Where you're like, something is missing here. So when you sent the note and you were like, this is really good. This is really good. That meant a lot because, again, I want to make sure that it can be as impactful as the vision says that it can be.
Absolutely. And I think that that's a great segue even to the next question. So, well, I'll say this before I ask it. Um it was really easy for me to buy in to this podcast because I believe in what you're pitching. I believe in what you're saying. I believe in what you're talking about. It's not just editing. It's not just work. But it is, I truly believe this. I believe that everything that comes across this platform is very meaningful and it's helping people change their lives. And I know sometimes people may look at it like, oh, it's just business tips. It's deeper. It's deeper than that. You're really, really changing lives. And so I recall a moment where I'm editing.
Mhm,
I'm listening to the podcast, but I think I told you one time I usually listen to it 3 times.
mhm,
I listen to it first to hear it. I listen to it second to edit, and then I listen to it third just to make sure I got everything. And so in listening to the podcast, I wasn't even aware, but my wife is in the other room. And what that individual was sharing on the podcast, and even some of the things that you were sharing on the podcast, both of us were like, oh my God,
mhm,
this is great. And I think I texted you and I was like, hey, my wife is in the other room. I didn't even know that she was listening. And she's
mhm.
like, oh man, this is incredible. This is exactly where we are right now. But it's meaningful to us. And so, um, can you share maybe either some of the stories or some of the people that you've encountered, whether it's an email, a comment, but just how your podcast has directly impacted some of your listeners?
Mhm. So I had someone reach out. Her name is Belinda. Um, and she's a part of this community that I go to every morning, speaking of filling your cup. So it's a devotional community. I've been attending it every morning for months now. And it's actually on LinkedIn. We sign on for 30 minutes. I never thought that I would find this safe space to talk about God on LinkedIn, but I
Mm,
found this safe space. And so I met her in this community, which is an audio community. So, you don't see people, you just hear. In that place, I've never talked about the podcast, right? I've never even talked about my business because I use that as a place to fuel myself. So I'm not even showing up with those type of motives. And she reached out to me, and she said that listening to my podcast, which obviously she took a step further and said, well, who is this person? And let me follow her and let me see what she's doing, kind of thing. So she did that on her own, as a result of maybe some kind of comment that I said within the community. Maybe that's what spurred it on. But she has now gone on to start a podcast because she was inspired by what she heard me doing, right?
Wow.
And so if I go back to where I started and why I got in this space, right? It was about lifting voices, right? And the example of me just showing up and me showing up consistently and me showing up with these empowering stories that are told by some amazing guests, it encouraged her to stand up and to do a podcast herself. So, of course, I'm encouraged by that alone, right? Where I'm like, wow, that made you step out of the gate and that made you lift your voice. But when I listened to her podcast, and I've listened to a few episodes now, and now I'm a subscriber of her podcast because I found it to be extremely powerful, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it unlocked her ability to show up and serve.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that she said she recognized about me that encouraged her, because her struggle was, how do I take my faith and allow it to be intermingled with
Mm.
what I show up and do professionally? And she said what she saw in me is that it was a seamless kind of interaction and a seamless engagement, is that you're going to interact with me and you're going to hear about faith and you're going to hear about my relationship with God, even though I may be talking about these business concepts, right? And so for her, seeing that example set her free. That to me is so empowering, right? To know that I started off just wanting to lift voices with interviews, and now there's this little thing that has birthed itself, and now it's lifting voices. And so generations will be changed because of that ripple effect.
Oh man, that is incredible. That's incredible. So they're not just saying, "Oh, this podcast is great," or "Denise, you're awesome," and thanks for the tips, but they're taking even your life and your experiences and what you're pushing out and being able to create something from it.
Mhm.
Um, I think that speaks volumes because I think oftentimes people feel like they have to have this massive platform just to reach people.
Mhm.
I have to have a bunch of followers. I have to have a bunch of subscribers or a bunch of views. And I think it was years ago. I think maybe a mentor shared with me just the power of one, the power of being able to either share your story with one person or to share your testimony or to share how your life was changed or to share your experience with one person. And if that one person becomes an ambassador, if that one person becomes an influencer or an encourager, and if they end up having the platform to reach 40,000, 100,000 people, then you've still done your job.
Mhm.
You've still done your work. And so I believe that that encourages many people. I want to ask you this. So I do understand that as I'm listening, I'm being changed.
Mhm.
But I've also found, at least in my personal life, that anything that means something to me when it's coming out to somebody else, it usually hits me first before it hits them.
Mhm.
If I'm about to encourage somebody else, you know the feeling when it's like, okay, I know that this is going to be impactful. I know that this is going to be. I feel this. It's and sometimes it's unexplainable what you feel, but it's like I know that this is going to hit.
Mhm.
Um, how has your content or your podcast? How has it changed your personal perspective or your career, even as you're sharing with other people? You see it impacting others, but how is what you are putting out impacting you?
Mhm. So one of the things that's real critical for me, and I'm sure you can relate to this, is that when you're taking a journey, right, and you're trying to move forward, you have to do something to keep hope alive, right?
Mm,
We don't always have days that are just great days. We have days that we have to make that decision to get through it regardless of what we face. For me, when I have these conversations with these amazing people, I end them and I sit in this chair and I think, wow, you know, if they could show up with that circumstance or they can show up facing that particular obstacle, then I have to keep hope alive for what it is that I am in pursuit of and I am doing. And I'll tell you a couple of them off the bat that just kind of resonates me. And it's so funny because it's almost like the top three episodes are the top three that I would talk about. So the first episode that comes to mind is my conversation with Kimberly Evans.
mhm,
Her episode was called The Assignment is Bigger Than You. It's episode, I'm looking at the list, it's episode number 7. That is our all-time top listened to episode. It's Bigger Than You. In that conversation, if you listen very closely, you can hear the struggle with what she's facing, but her determination to overcome it because she could sense that God was calling her to something bigger, for a bigger
mhm,
cause, for a bigger responsibility. And I
mhm.
think what translates to me is I got to keep that joy before me,
Yeah.
right? I got to keep the joy before me and keep going because the assignment is bigger than me. So that's one of the things that sticks out. Our second all to listen episode is probably one of the most powerful conversations I've ever had. It's with Dr. Kama Thomas. And she talked about her journey of coming to America. And that story, I think that was the first time you messaged me and was like, hey, I don't think I can cut this up. Like I think this conversation got to go all the way through. And I know we try to time box things and I know we try to keep the episode small, but I think this conversation needs to be told in its entirety. And I
Yeah.
agree with you
Mhm,
because it's such a powerful conversation.
mhm,
But that's a real life story of
mhm,
somebody sitting across from me. And when you listen to the broken promises that were made and you listen to
mhm,
what hardship she had to face coming here, just pursuing life, let alone getting her doctoral degree, it's just amazing, you know, when you sit across from someone who's had that kind of triumph. And then the third one was with Shalisha Moultrie telling the story about when life happens, right?
yeah.
When you hit those hard moments in life and life happens. And in her particular case, they had her husband needed a kidney and he
Mhm,
was on the waiting list. And then she
mhm,
lost her job. And, you know, they just had a whole lot of life happening at one time and how God can restore you, right? And give you back all the things. So when you're sitting across from people who are telling you not something they watched on a movie, not something they heard about, but their life story, you cannot help but be moved, right? You cannot help but be moved from that. And that always fuels my hope tank. It allows me to stay hopeful, right? With
mhm.
everything that I'm doing and everything that I face. And so these conversations absolutely change me.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Man, that's incredible. It's got to be rewarding being able to see the fruit of what you're putting out. You're creating a platform, and I know sometimes people are creating platforms to make a name for themselves, but it has to be rewarding to create a platform where people are able to share their stories. And as a result, that even more people, everybody who's listening, their lives are being changed as a result. You're being changed as you're listening or as you're sitting across the table from many of these individuals. One of the other rewards, we got to talk about this. One of the other rewards, or at least that has been rewarding of this podcast, I want you to talk about how it feels for your voice to be echoing around the world on other sides of the world, not just on the other side of the country in different states. And you can speak to maybe even some of the actual statistics, but how does that feel knowing that what you're putting out, people in other countries that you may never meet, people in other cultures, other communities, people who don't look like you, sound like you. How does that feel to know that this is getting out around the world?
It's overwhelming. I'm not gonna lie. I think about, I love to travel, but I don't know that I will ever step foot in all of these countries, and it's
Mm,
growing. Um, we have managed to get past some of the hurdles that many new podcasts run into. Some podcasts only have one episode. Very few have 10 episodes. So the fact that we're at the point where we've got 28 episodes is already in and of itself an amazing feat of work, right? A
mm,
body of work in the podcast space. Getting to where we are with season one is a big deal. But when you
yeah,
layer on top of it the reach, right? When
yeah.
you layer on top of it the fact that there is listening all across the US. And let's just talk about that, right? The US goes from East Coast to West Coast. It goes from the South all the way up to the North. The footprint of the US in and of itself is a big deal. And we have a very strong listening base in the US. But when
Mhm.
I go in, and I don't go in often because I try not to look at numbers, because numbers, they're never what you want it to be. The scale is never the right number. The bank account is never the right number. Like all the numbers are never what you want them to be. So I try not to look at numbers, but my diligence says that I have to keep an eye on analytics, right? So
Mhm.
I do from
Yeah.
time to time go in and make sure the momentum is there and we're getting the push that we need behind the podcast. And when I go in and I recognize a new country, right, I'm blown away. And as it stands right now, including the US, we have a footprint of listeners in 15 countries, right? So I'm blown away by that. I'm blown away that there are listeners in the UK. I'm blown away that there are listeners in France, in Canada, in Nigeria, in Singapore, in South Sudan, in Australia, in Finland, in Turkey, in Austria, in the Philippines, in Trinidad and Tobago, in Poland, in Kenya. I am blown away, right? When I think about my humble beginnings as this little Black girl in the city of Dayton, Ohio, I never imagined this, right? I never imagined that my voice would be heard by one somebody anywhere, let alone one somebody's all across the country, all across the world. And so that type of impact always blows me away. Completely honest. It just blows me away when I click on that button and it goes down. And I'm not just talking about a smidge of listeners, like there's percentages of listeners in these places, which means that they're resonating with the stories that are being
Mhm.
told. Oftentimes we think that these stories that we have to tell about our life journeys, that they don't amount to anything, but people
Yeah.
are encouraged, people are empowered by the stories that are being told. But I will tell you, the statistic that blows me away the most, Ty,
Hmm.
is only 84% of our listeners are female. So that means that there are men that are listening in to the podcast. And
Yes.
in and of itself, the podcast is called Career Success for Women Leaders. That doesn't seem to be a gating factor.
Mm-mm.
They are finding wisdom in this platform, and they are coming to the table to be a part of what's going on. In the last statistic I'll share, only because I have the page up. The bulk of our listeners are in that age range of 35 to 44. Why is that a big deal to me? As a person who sits across from you as 54 years old, I am 54 years old. That means the generation behind me has an ear to the
Mhm.
wisdom that is being shared on this platform. And to that, I give a thumbs up, right? The only way that we can really make an impact for our future is if those that are behind me, people like me, right, are listening in to take advantage and take heed to wisdom that
Yeah.
is being shared from lived experiences. And so when I look at the listener base, and and literally 74% is 44 and younger, I'll take
Yeah.
I'll,
Mhm.
I'll take it. 74% of our listening base is 44 and younger. That means their life can be changed by listening to the wisdom of the experiences shared on this podcast. And that to me is a huge win.
That is a huge that is a huge win. I love everything about that. I'm not surprised about the men listening. Because I already told you, I'm listening in many of the questions that maybe are specifically catered to women. I'm just like, well, this could apply to men too. I'm
Mhm.
gonna take that for myself. But that's incredible. The thing that I love about your voice getting out around the world is that you said it. Many of these places you may never step foot. But that is the amazing thing about technology is that your voice can go into places that you'll never walk in, people that you may never meet, but that your voice, your vision, still carries weight even in places all around the world. And so that's incredible. I would hope that that would be a motivator as well. It's good to hear the stories of how it's impacting people's lives, but I've always felt like even if you don't hear the stories, for you to be able to still look into the analytics and say, but they're getting it,
Mhm.
to be encouraged in that, knowing that even if people don't comment, even if they don't send the email, oh, y'all getting it. You're getting the content, and I know what it's doing.
Mhm.
Listen, Denise, I've been enjoying myself listening to the podcast. I know that there is much, much more content that is to come from you. I'm excited because obviously we're celebrating the completion of season one. But I don't want anybody to run off thinking that this is the end. This is just the beginning.
Mhm.
And so we're celebrating season one. And so we want everybody to be on the lookout for season two, which if you would like to go ahead and mark your calendars for the first Monday in October, which is October the 7th, for season two. But in the meantime, there's still much, 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 much more content for you to still be able to thrive off of. Continue to check out um, Career Success Academy.live.
Mhm.
Yes, I'm about to say it for some reason. Like Career Success Academy live. Continue to go to that website and check out all of the resources that we've made available for you. Continue to follow on social media and like, as well as we'll continue to put out more and more content with that also. And then Denise, if you could, I'll throw it over to you. Just let us know maybe what you have coming up or information that you'd like to share with your audience as we're closing up season
Absolutely.
one.
Absolutely. I just want to thank everyone for tuning in to season one of all the incredible interviews that we had. Ty and I were counting it up. I think we ended up with like 18 different guests that have graced the stage with us over the course of season one. We've got more incredible guests planned for season two, kicking off in October. A couple of weeks ago, I started pushing out these wisdom moments to you guys as well. Those will continue over the summer. And so you can definitely take advantage of checking those out. So we're not disappearing. We're just taking the summer off from doing interviews. As I was thinking about how to close this out, definitely give my thanks, right? I thank you, Ty, for showing up and for delivering some amazing work as it relates to the podcast. I am so pleased. So thank you for your work. Thank you for your listening and your commitment to helping to build this vision. Um, I had an opportunity to do a speaking event this past weekend, And I talked about don't let hard stop you. That was my whole
Mm-hmm.
theme at the speaking event, is don't let hard stop you. And I said hard was two different acronyms that you get to choose which one you want to be for you. You can allow hard to be something that make you hide away and resist decision, or you can allow hard to be something that allows you to have audacity and rise determined. And so I say rise determined. I say have audacity and rise determined. My ultimate mission is for women to get into seats of decision making authority. And for me, that's a seat where you can dispense opportunity and resources, and you
Mm-hmm.
can open the door for people who look like you. Right? Look like you in ethnicity, in gender, in lifestyle, whatever the case may be, look like you. And so the only way we're going to do that is we've got to apply wisdom. We've got to take lived experience and glean those nuggets. And we have to not let hard things stop us. We have to have audacity, and we have to rise determined. And so this has been an amazing experience. I love season one. I love everyone who has graced the stage and their willingness to be so transparent with us and
Mm-hmm.
share their experience. We are getting, I told Ty before we got on that we're getting emails from people who are listening. They want to come and be on the show. So we've got some amazing interviews lined up for season two. I cannot wait to get back at the mic doing interviews with guests. In the meantime, you'll get a chance to hear wisdom for me, but I'm looking forward to season two. So thank you so much, Ty. Thank you to everyone everywhere that's listening and sharing this out. Just keep listening and keep applying what is impactful to your life.
Thank you.